So I've been avoiding making a video all day and I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure if my few days of feeling good are subsiding today and I'm transitioning into the week or so worth of kind of blahness. And I'll call Hearty Nutritionals on Monday and see what they think about the way it's going. I ended up just watching a YouTube video of the top 200 songs in terms of views on YouTube. And I stared at that for probably 2 hours. And so, yeah, I've just been kind of staring at the screen, which is something I don't usually do. But I definitely allow myself to whenever that's what seems to be good for my brain. And speaking of looking at the screen, but in a more productive way, today I watched Katie Mottram's documentary called Emerging Proud. It was released today, and I think she had an event in the UK, and there were events held in certain places around the world, and the documentary was premiered. And so happy Emerging Proud Day. I'm not sure if it's an annual thing. And I thought it was very good. I thought it was very well done. And the way she did it was from clips that people either sent in about their stories of spiritual emergence. I don't use that term very often. I use my own term as map consciousness to indicate so-called mania and psychosis, but also meaning, action potential, or a lot of different things. And also that it's sort of like unmapped territory. It's something that we're exploring in consciousness. But anyways, spiritual emergence is another term, or spiritual emergency, and I could try to use that more often because it's not good to keep saying so-called mania and psychosis. I don't know why I say that. I think it's to delineate between the good and the not as good parts of the process. And in the video they talked about dark night of the soul or shadow, as opposed to so-called psychosis. And maybe when I continue to go through this process of coming off meds, if I have to go through some of the elements that are not yet finished, perhaps I can work on reframing those and not thinking of them in terms of psychosis, which I already don't. It's just right now I think handy to actually make videos talking about some of the common language, because if I only use uncommon terms, then people might not know what the heck I'm talking about. And by weaving them both in together, hopefully eventually through conversation and knowing what we're talking about, we can create our own language that we don't have to use any of those terms at all. And those terms weren't used at all, barely, in the whole documentary, which was nice. And I thought that the selection of clips was very good, and it gave a lot of different examples of the depth and breadth of the experience, the possibilities, and I noticed some of the language that I use with myself in there. One person near the end was talking about how this has something to do with the evolution of humanity, and I've talked about that. And there were a few other things that people mentioned that were really clear to me, that we speak a lot of the same language inside, and how we would talk about it if we started talking about it more might just be kind of self-evident. One person might say something and the other person might be like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. that's a good way to describe it. Let's talk about it in that way. Or it's not about one way, actually. It's talking about it in lots of different ways. And not just talking about it, but what language the process wants to create and how that process wants us to relate. So I thought it was very well done, and I actually made it into the film in the credits. Let's see if you can pick me out. And some of my story is going to be in the book that goes with the film, and I haven't seen that yet. So it's on Vimeo, I think that's how you pronounce it, and it's called Emerging Proud. And it's definitely worth a watch, and I think there's quite a bit going on in that movement. And when I go home, I do want to get more involved somehow and not be such a chicken. And hopefully that goes along with being able to taper off these meds. That would be awesome if when I went home I was off the meds and I could speak from that and things were just roses and butterflies for the rest of my life. Well, I'm not expecting that, but there's been 3 films released lately, which one is Katie Mottram's Emerging Proud, another is Healing Voices, and another is Crazy Wise. And I think the cost of production is probably Katie Mottram's the least, Healing Voices the middle, and Crazy Wise the most expensive. But I actually enjoyed Katie's documentary a bit more than Crazy Wise, and I enjoyed Healing Voices more than Crazy Wise, and I'm not sure why that is. Perhaps because Crazy Wise focuses mainly on the shamanic interpretation, and I'm not sure. It was nice to hear from a lot of different people in Katie Mottram's film, because it gives a little bit more weight to these things happening in people than just having 2 people shown or 3 people shown. I'm not sure. I thought it was really good. And I like all of them. Anybody who releases a film with this kind of information, it's super awesome. And somebody even mentioned Krishnamurti in the Emerging Proud documentary, just kind of in passing, but I thought that was kind of cool because he's one of the people that I have studied over the years. And one thing I've talked about but I don't really emphasize, but possibly could more, is the fact that it's a healing process, and I don't talk about that very much. And when somebody said that in the film, it made me think about what I was talking about with the change in myelination in bipolar mentioned by Patricia Louise. And I was thinking about how it's almost like the brain is sending more myelin up there in order to help heal that area of the brain, kind of like inflammation in any other part of our body. When we have an injury of some kind, it will get somewhat inflamed, and that's part of the healing process. And it seems like the brain has a similar mechanism, but with the myelin, because it doesn't have the same inflammatory process in the rest of the tissue of the body. So to me, it seems like inflammyelination. So it's this inflammatory process in the brain almost, but it's part of the brain's healing process when these psychological things happen. So when this energy comes in to sort of sort out some of these psychological things happening, it is also changing the structure of the brain, because our thoughts and everything are tied up in the brain cells. And Krishnamurti would say that thought is a material process. So when all of that is going on overdrive and also it's chaotic and it's reorganizing, it makes sense in a way that there would be some kind of change in the brain cells and maybe sending myelin up to the prefrontal cortex and also to the lateral ventricles as a way of preparing the brain for reorganization. And that's part of healing too. When we have an injury, say we sprain our ankle, it has to heal, it has to reorganize, it has to recycle some of the old broken tissue and create new tissue and buffer the process in the meantime. And I have a feeling that's partly what's happening in the brain. It's inflammyelination. It's not just brain disease or demyelination, it's reorganization. And if the brain is doing this, it must have some intelligence behind it. If we sprain our ankle, we don't try to stop the healing process. We might do things to keep the inflammation from getting too out of control, mainly for our own pain tolerance. And I do a lot of talking to myself, and I frame it in the context of talking to myself because, well, there's a few reasons. One is that there are things I want to talk to, and I'm not sure if anybody wants to talk about it with me, so I talk to myself. And also I talk to myself because some of the things I say aren't necessarily correct, and that's a way to say them anyway without having someone filter what I would say because they think I'm not saying what is correct or factual. And the other thing too is I'm just talking to myself, so if I ever share this and people listen, they're just listening to me talking to myself. I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm not recommending anything. I'm not promoting anything. I'm not doing anything except having a conversation with myself. And that's a lot because I have no idea what to do, and so all I can really do right now is talk to myself. And the thing with mental health is that right now it's framed as this big medical problem, so nobody should be listening to anybody but professionals about what's happening because it's this disease, and I'm trying to talk about it like it's something completely different. And if people understood it as not a disease, not a medical problem at all, which is probably quite a few years away from being the truth, then we could just talk about this and not have to worry about if we're interfering with somebody's medical record or professional help. We divert all this to the professionals, and it talks a lot about that in the book On Our Own by Judy Chamberlain, which is a really good book. I just finished reading it. And it's kind of scary how the same stuff that was going on in the mid-70s is still going on today with maybe fancier names and a little bit dressed up with the word recovery and things like that. But we're still transformed into chronic mental patients. And I don't see myself as a mental patient. And right now I am technically in the category of chronic mental patient. And my real goal is to get myself out of being in that category of chronic mental patient by not having any participation with any of the services that have to do with medical stuff. So that would be medication, psychiatrists, etc. The psychosocial stuff, the stuff to do with daily living, I would still participate with, because people need that if they're in crisis in life or struggling. People need those kinds of services and help. And hopefully one day I won't need that either, or I'll be able to support people in some way to transition out of the system. My real goal is to transition out of the system so it shows that it can be done. So then people who might want the same have some proof in a way that it can be done. And I won't stop until I do it or die trying. So that's kind of where I'm at. And then my goal would be to help people transition out of being a chronic mental patient, because we die 25 years less statistically on average from the studies. So why not put a little bit of time and energy in terms of years trying to get out of it, and then we might actually, by virtue of doing that, live 25 years longer. So it could be worth the pain and effort, or the scary facts of trying to decouple from this very powerful story that we've been told. And I would think it's a really good story if people that I know and read about and myself just took the pills and lived happily ever after till we're 85 like everyone else. But that's not how it goes. We're still suffering, we're still struggling, it's still hell. It's not science, it's experimentation, and it's still happening on us. And so I hope I can get off these drugs. I don't know if I can. It's not the easiest thing. And yeah, that's my little thing right now. This is to myself, and I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to tell anybody what to do with their own life. If people want to take pills, take pills. I've taken pills. They can be helpful sometimes, but that's why I don't want to participate with that. If that system could guarantee that it wouldn't steal 25 years from my life, then maybe I would be a little bit more excited about participating with it. But I'm not. And then the next thing would be to prevent the next generation from being turned into chronic mental patients. And a lot of that has to do with the context with which each one of us perceives these types of experience, and if we're able to receive people with love and care and patience and time and safety while they transition through this, instead of passing them over to the authorities who will then drug them for life. Now, if anybody doesn't want this to happen to their children or their nieces or nephews or friends' kids, then it's time to start thinking about this differently. And again, I'm not telling anybody what to think. I'm just talking to myself at length, and I'll probably just continue to talk to myself, because as far as I know, I'm the only one that wants to hear all of this. And one of the benefits of getting a label could be that it actually makes us easier to find each other. So however many people are labeled with bipolar 1, you are officially part of my neurotribe. Our brains work in similar ways. So take away all the disease, the illness, all of that. Our brains are undergoing the same energetic process. So we are officially a neurotribe. So pick a different term, and we're similar brain casts. Just like there's different races, different bodies, different skin colors, there's different brain types. Look at the autism brain type. Now, some people go through this brain transition later in life. And it's not just to change our brains, but it's also to help change the world, even if it's only ever so slightly. And people aren't seeing the positive sides of our brains and our potentials, and maybe we're not seeing it either. And part of the reason is because we're not having a conversation in different ways. So yeah, when I get home, I'm going to start up some kind of group and a lot of different stuff, because I have lots of ideas and I've talked about them, but I can't do them all by myself. So we need each other, and just creating a neurotribe and framing it in the ways that resonates more with our hearts than with what we're told. And a lot of these experiences we have that are kind of strange, they can be lived, but they're difficult to explain. When we explain them, they sound impossible, but we experience them, so in that way they are possible. And what I'm trying to get at is, a lot of what I've talked about with myself is talking about the experiences or things related to that, or explaining some of the experiences a little bit, but that's not the same as living the experiences. So maybe one day when we're fully a neurotribe, we're not even talking about explaining experiences to each other. Like, I had this experience, I had that experience, this means this means that, about the experiences, but actually living that experience together. It feels like we go into different dimensions sometimes. Now, imagine if we actually do go into a different dimension together, and we're just living there together, and we're not explaining these incongruent experiences, or one person had one experience, another person had another experience, another person had another experience. All those experiences separately point to some strange stuff going on. But imagine we actually lived in those experiences together, and then it wasn't strange, and then that's just how it is, and it became sort of invisible, because reality works in different ways than we think, for sure. And the more of us that get together on that, the more that will be brought into manifestation, not just individually, but collectively. Just like reason must have been this thing that was emerging in individuals, and then people got together and two people are talking in that way, and then all of a sudden it spreads more and more and more, and then that level of experience, living that experience, is just the way it's lived. People no longer explain reason. It's just assumed that people are operating in some kind of reasonable way. Even, I say reasonable, and a lot of it's probably still not that reasonable, but we assume that that's the way it is without even assuming that's the way it is. It's just like air. It's just there. So in the same way, some of these strange experiences might one day just be like air. They won't be strange. And I feel one of the reasons that hasn't happened is because we're labeled as defective and pretty much forced into isolation. We're not talking about these things. And somebody in the documentary said, "This is what's happening to me." And the only reason I mentioned that is my brain immediately thought, this process is what's happening to the me. Not me or you or her or him or they or them. It's happening to the me. We each have a me, and this energy is trying to break up the me in general. It's trying to break up that way of relating and having this personal ego dominate, because the world can no longer sustain that way of viewing the world. It can no longer sustain that perspective. So it comes in and it breaks up this perspective. And so it's not personal. It's not, this is what's happening to me. This is what's happening to the me all over the world. And the me makes certain things happen. The me has created this society as it's designed, with the family system and success and progress and hierarchies and blah 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 blah. And this energy makes something else happen. This energy that breaks up the me, if that was able to be fully integrated and transform the brain, would create a different world, because it's a different operating system. So in that way, it's important to end the me. Anything we can do to end the me in between so-called crises will help that process, because that process is trying to break up the me. So whatever that looks like. And also somebody mentioned something about having an observing presence while these certain belief structures can come and try and operate. And in a way, that's sort of what happens, is we're observing these belief structures passing by, and they're scary, and then sometimes they actually take hold of us, and then we act based on that belief structure. So I could have a thought that aliens are coming to invade, and I can have an observing presence of that, and it's terrifying. But if it actually takes hold of me, well, then maybe I run down into the basement and hide under the bed and and start yelling out prayers or something like that. So I feel it's important to observe the beliefs, which is part of the me structure, because they try and come in and operate, and just watch them go by. And this happened to me when I was in a crisis in January. As I was walking to go lay down and rest, I had taken some Seroquel. There was some crazy things going on in my brain. I can't even remember. Something about aliens, terrifying stuff. But I was just walking, and then I just laid down, and I just would rest and let it all happen, and not actually let it take hold. And part of the thing is, if there's not much of a me there, the belief doesn't have much to cling on to and anchor onto to start to operate. So there can be fear, but not a me that's afraid, in a way. So can we operate with no beliefs, and can we operate with no me? And Krishnamurti talks at great length about ending self-centered activity. And if we don't do it, if we don't use some of our life energy to do that, this energy comes in and does it anyway. And I think I've talked about how the fear a lot of times is the me trying to end. And when the me tries to end, the me associates that with, I must be dying. But really, it's just the thought structures trying to come to an end. And it's definitely challenging, and I feel that I may again have to face death, actually go through this ego death, and it's really scary. And I usually take Seroquel, but I don't want to take that crap again. So we will see.